Now we're going to move on to our JLABS presentation and meet three more companies. You can see the diversity of the companies that are growing in New York City and the science that they're pursuing. And you can also see, the happenstance sometimes that just occurs when a scientist, is going back to his lab to start a second career, and something happens across his desk and then becomes involved in another company. It's like Will Canine founding Opentrons because he didn't want to do the pipetting in GenSpace. So it's really interesting how these companies actually get sparked and developed. I also want to mention, before I bring that next panel in, Tracy Lessor, who is seated right mid, see her hand there. She is doing some active social media throughout the day today. It's a tool we're using to try to build our community. So she's covering all of the panels, and if you can interface with her, like her posts or repost them yourselves with your own comments, that would be much appreciated. Okay, so let's welcome JLABS.
So I think today we're all gathering here. I've heard a few panel discussions. Really wonderful opportunity for us to be in this ecosystem, meeting with all the entrepreneurs and supporters in this community. So I'll start with my self-introduction and pass it on to my panelists. I'm Tintin Zhang Karas, head for JLABS in the US Northeast, based in New York City. I have been working and living here for the past 13 years. After graduating with my PhD in immunology, moved from Boston to New York. And my past career has been through consulting initially, from the research side, switching to the business side, and then went to Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center as a licensing manager. So that was my first step, tapping into the BD field. And then I spent the past 10 years in 3 different pharma companies, initially at Eli Lilly for 6 years in their oncology search and evaluation team, and then joined Ipsen to lead their oncology external innovation team, working on in and out licensing, acquisition of assets and companies, as well as advising the companies for investment into startups in the life science industry. Since August last year, I've joined Johnson & Johnson within their Johnson & Johnson innovation team to head all the activities in the US Northeast for JLABS. And JLABS is an innovator space, an accelerator program established by Johnson & Johnson more than 10 years ago that have expanded over the past more than 10 years globally through 11 sites, including the latest addition in Singapore and South Korea. And in New York, we have a beautiful site in Soho, located on the 3rd floor in the New York Genome Center, with 30,000 square feet, including lab space and office space, providing a home for more than 50 companies that we have incubated throughout the past 6 years, since the initiation of our site in collaboration with the New York City Economic Development Corporation back in 2018. So with that, I'd be happy to introduce to you 3 of the panelists that are our resident companies from the JLABS New York City. So first, starting with you, Dave, if you can give us a self-intro.
Hi, everyone. I'm David Longo. I'm the CEO and founder of Ordeos. Ordeos is designing mini-protein and single-domain antibody drugs with a lab-in-the-loop AI-driven technology. My background is in computational mathematics. I studied dynamical systems on networks. That's a fancy way of saying rumor spread across social networks. I then did what every good math major does, and I started a music company that became the 8th largest recording studio around the country over the course of about 10 years. Sold off assets to Spotify, went back to school, Harvard for biotech, Stanford for AI, and started Ordeos. And I was introduced to JLABS through our investor base and was welcomed into JLABS New York City in 2022, and have recently actually joined JLABS Korea as a virtual resident, which is a wonderful program to get access to that Korean infrastructure and that Korean community. Thank you.
Great. So good morning. My name is Dory Thomas-Karyat. I'm the CEO and founder of Synthesis Therapeutics, and we are building a first-in-class antibody-drug conjugate platform to selectively and safely treat patients who have cancer and fibrotic disease. I am a tumor immunologist by training. I trained here in New York at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. I was a postdoc there. And then I worked in pharma on the drug discovery side for several years. And we built novel biologics and therapeutics there. And when I left, I was kind of compelled to take some of the work I did as a postdoc and just sort of think about it, drugging it differently, and that's how Synthis was born. Really to kind of improve the therapies that are available for this particular pathway that is a causal driver of both cancer and fibrosis, and we wanted to solve that problem. And we joined JLABS actually earlier this year. We were fortunate to win the Quickfire Challenge, the New York City-based one. And so we joined in February, and happy to be here and answer any questions as well.
Thank you. Paul Ron, CEO of OS Therapies. We're actually the newest resident of JLABS in this crew. We joined JLABS this summer. And I think this audience will want to know the reason we moved to JLABS, the reason we moved to New York City, is because a large majority of our investors are here in New York City. And as we discussed this, and Dave and I were just talking before we came on stage, the importance of where your investors are located and where you end up being located are very parallel. And you have the biggest source of funding for any industry, much less biotech, here and in Boston. So you've got some great opportunities here. I actually got to work very closely with economic development groups when I was both Amgen and Boehringer Ingelheim. And it's really important that you keep pushing New York as a hub for biotech.
That's excellent. So I don't know if I can use the remote control to just showcase some of the supports that we provide from JLABS. So I mentioned earlier that JLABS is under the Johnson & Johnson Innovation Arm. We provide very capital-efficient incubator space for startup companies in the life science space that includes both therapeutic program development as well as medtech development. And over the past 6+ years that the New York site has been in existence, we have incubated more than 100 companies. And we have the JLABS Navigator online if you're interested in looking into any of the companies, including these 3 companies that are listed over there. Feel free to browse through. And currently, we have 50 companies that are either physically based at our site or virtual members of our site. And I think we have a representation of every different category here on stage. Of the companies that we have incubated, you might be wondering how many of them, or what's the percentage breakdown between therapeutic programs versus medtech programs. And we have about 70% or 75% that are more therapeutic drug development oriented, with about 15-16% that's more medtech development oriented. And we also have cross-sector opportunities that are being developed by many of these companies that are more platform technology based, and even some companies that are working on consumer products or skin health, because we want to provide a very welcoming and nurturing ecosystem and community to these startup companies in New York. We welcome them into our site, and we maintain a balance, because essentially we are sourcing for Johnson & Johnson for business development, partnership, collaboration, and investment considerations. So when we evaluate an application coming in, we always pay a lot of attention to whether there's strategic alignment or adjacency to Johnson & Johnson's strategy. And in the meantime, because we're at the forefront of innovation sourcing, sometimes it may not be on strategy for us this year for a larger corporation, but maybe in the next 2, 3, 5 years, it will become on strategy for Johnson & Johnson. So we always keep an open mind and help these entrepreneurs to get their lab space or office space started and build a close relationship between these startups, entrepreneurs, as well as Johnson & Johnson internal experts from R&D, regulatory, commercial, et cetera. So we have these great offerings and supports provided to our companies, depending on what the level of alignment between their strategy and programs and our interest. We have the JPAL program, that's a mentorship program to connect the CEOs or the scientific leaders from startups with the Johnson & Johnson experts within the domain of relevant areas. And we also have resource hubs that will allow discounted services from CDMOs, CROs, and even legal support or consulting, tax support, accounting companies to help these startup companies to further develop their technologies. In addition, we also connect them with investors through our innovation activation events. We have our innovation activation team colleagues sitting right here in the audience who always organize these very proactive and interactive opportunities for networking with other potential partners, collaborators, academic medical centers, as well as investors in the ecosystem. And lastly, but not the least, I think diversity and inclusion is very important for us. So we have a great representation of not only minority leaders and also female leaders in the company's C-suite. So we really help foster this diverse environment for everyone to thrive and help each other. So hopefully that's the experience that has been for you guys. But I think you each mentioned how you came to apply for JLABS, but maybe you can also share with the audience how your experience has been so far since you've been a community member here.
Certainly, happy to start. So Ordeos, like I said, is designing proteins with computers effectively. And for the early part of our existence, we were using computers mostly and using CROs for lab space. So when for lab activity. So when we joined JLABS, we actually just had an office, and that office gave us access to, or not even an office, a desk. And that gave us access to our JPAL and the phenomenal team at JLABS, which helped us navigate strategic decisions along the way and helped us focus our activities towards what would be best to continue the fundraise. And as we did that, we were able to land some larger deals that forced us into the lab. And when we were in the lab, we started at one lab bench, expanded to two. At one point, I think we were using way too many labs, and we moved into, or benches, and we moved into a private lab. Now we're in three. And so that experience has been driven by the fantastic operations team at JLABS that's made working in the lab very easy. We don't have to think about these larger waste management issues or protocol issues or any sort of regulatory, right? It's all handled for us, and we have access to the phenomenal equipment on site. On top of that, as Ting Ting mentioned, strategic alignment finds its way of working itself out over the years, and so conversations can continue between startups and J&J proper to look at some interesting business development opportunities, whether that is through J&J or through alternative connections there. So it's been really wonderful.
Thank you, Dave. And I think your team has been such a pleasure to work with, and they work there 24/7. We see them all the time.
Yeah, if you look at the after hours log, it's pretty much me and Victor.
Yeah, I'd love to weigh in. We've been in the site since February, and I have to say it's just been an amazing experience for us. We've been able, like as a scientist, my network is a lot of science, but coming into JLABS, I really feel like we've been able to be exposed to so many different partners and collaborators. You know, we were brought to the JLABS CEO Summit recently, and we were allowed to interact with so many advisors, investors, collaborators, and it's really exposed us to a lot of opportunities for developing the company and thinking through our strategy that we didn't have before it. You know, we started in oncology, we're moving to fibrosis. On both levels, we've been able to talk to JLABS, J&J advisors and senior leadership that can help us weigh in on our programs. And I think that is huge when you're a startup company. You know, you have an idea. I am a scientist, but it's amazing to get like buy-in or even like insight, like, why don't you go in this direction? We think that sounds really interesting. That really helps you build your programs. It gives you confidence in what you're doing and saying this is the right direction for the company. And I mean, I can keep talking, but I think there's just been so many opportunities of attending like the IO 360 meeting with the JLABS support and really kind of met some investors there that's kind of helped us build out our IO program. There's just been a lot of opportunities that I think just gets provided as being in that ecosystem. And so we are truly grateful and excited about what the years bring us, especially 2025.
Thank you, Dory, for sharing that. And Paul, I know you joined JLABS when OS Therapies is at a very different stage of development compared to a lot of startup companies. So would you like to share more from the public company perspective?
Sure, and part of us moving to New York was IPOing on August 1st. The collective goal of this audience is to encourage biotechnology in New York, and it's a double-edged sword, right? Because it's hard to get people to move a whole industry regionally, but once you get them, they stay, and that they're great jobs. The interesting thing about JLABS is they're really investing in technologies that are 3 to 5 years out. So they're taking a very long-term strategy. Our first technology that's finished through the clinical trials, the first time I applied for JLABS in DC, they weren't interested. But it's our ADC technology, like Dory's, that's really the future of some of the medical drug delivery systems in the next 10 to 20 years. It's that technology that's 3 to 5 years back for us. That's what J&J was interested in. So you got to play the long ball, but it's a very good payoff for your community, for the industry, for New York Bio.
And I would just follow up on Paul's comment here because OS Therapies joined us as a virtual member, which means that they do not actually physically sit within the JLAB space, but you're invited to participate in all of these innovation activation events, including the most recent Global JLAB CEO Summit, which all three of you attended. Thank you for your time. And Paul even shared on stage at the New York Stock Exchange his experience and advice with the other entrepreneurs that may be at the earlier stage of their company development. So I think from our perspective, we are truly appreciative of all the entrepreneurs coming together, sharing their experience and learnings with one another. It's a community that we are building, not just a place for them to build their labs or build their companies, but more importantly, to support them and help them form a strong bond to go through some of the more challenging times in biotech development over the recent years. Yeah. So I think from that perspective, would you like to share some of your forward-thinking ideas about what trend you are seeing emerging from this ecosystem that's really shaping this ecosystem, especially in the New York area? So I'll start from you, Paul, actually reverse the order a little bit.
I think all the technologies coming together, some of the technology that Dave's working on, the technology that Dory and I are working on, are really going to change the landscape of therapeutics over the next 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah, I'm going to echo that. I think, especially like say in the oncology space, but across therapeutic areas, having drugs that are selectively delivered as opposed to systemically delivered is going to be huge because you get to really vocalize and focus what your drugs are going to be doing, and I think that'll increase your therapeutic window. And more than that, I mean, you are actually going to really be able to find the right patient populations if you actually have a targeted therapy. You might decrease the number of patients, but the ones you pick, they will actually respond better. And I envision that that's where therapeutics almost has to go because we really need to get these medicines in patients that actually can show what they can do, and I think that's where it's going.
I think speaking to the New York ecosystem and JLABS specifically, there's so much more collaboration happening inside of our companies, even across incubators. So I know there was mention of Opentrons earlier. The access to different parts of the value chain with each individual startup makes it easier to mix and match and make some resource-conscious decisions going forward that benefit everyone. And I look forward to that continuing as the New York ecosystem grows.
And I would also share my thoughts on this because I think New York is at a really unique intersection between life sciences, medical excellence, talents from global areas all coming here, as well as the fast development of artificial intelligence and machine learning. So we already see a lot of companies that are integrating that into their drug development or medtech development process. And we're seeing a lot of these companies starting to apply for JLABS, not necessarily because they want to build the entire therapeutic program here, but because they want to tap into the tech community here. With Google and Amazon coming to New York, staying and expanding in this ecosystem, we are also actively exploring potential ways of working closely with them, bringing more benefits into the startup ecosystem. So definitely looking forward to more companies in this ecosystem that we can build together a more vibrant environment for life science development. So I think we have maybe just time for one question from the audience, if any.
Put them to sleep.
Thank you. Question for you. It sounds like it's a great environment and it's very collaborative and everything, but clearly there's always challenges. What do you think you would do differently knowing what you know about JLABS now?
Is that for me or for all the panelists? So I can take it on because I think I mentioned earlier that Johnson & Johnson as a large corporation, they have their strategy and sometimes it's quite stringent in times. And from JLAB's perspective, we try to work very closely with our internal key stakeholders, as well as with the external companies that we are trying to foster the relationship with J&J. So the challenges are how can we be more open-minded or help our internal key stakeholders to become more risk-embracing, open-minded about emerging early-stage technologies. And we have a very good mechanism to do that. There are specific types of collaborations or partnerships that we can explore for early-stage innovations, and we are actively exploring them with companies that are strategically aligned or adjacent to J&J. So that's one thing that we will continue working very actively on and trying to identify more of those opportunities.
Great question.
And I could just add, as a JLABS member, when I joined, I suppose you expect some things to come to you. And with such a phenomenally large organization, you have to do quite a bit of work to get your way through. And that's true of anything as a startup. But as I invested more in building those relationships and in navigating the complex internals of J&J, I got more out of it, right? So that's what I would do differently next time.
Thank you very much for
Thank you.
the panel discussion.
Thank you.